Hey guys, how's it going? Today we're going to be doing some Prot Warrior action. Like me a bit of Prot Warrior, yes I do. So we're going to start on the stats. As a Prot Warrior, there are three main ways you can reforge and gem and build your gear around. The first one is full critical strike rating, where to old tanks that seems a bit weird, but in Mr. Pandaria, and I suppose going into Warlords, they want to keep the model the same, which is tanks are basically a DPS source. They are very accountable for part of the DPS. If your tank's DPS is low, that's really not good for the raid. So crit's like a full DPS spec, but I prefer a much more survival based spec. I like to stay alive as a tank for obvious reasons. Which brings you on to the next one, mastery spec, going full mastery, and then parry and dodge, where it has high DPS and high survivability. It's very stable. You can block a lot, so your damage intake is very stable going out throughout the fight. But the build I like to go the most, and I'm rocking right now, is full avoidance, and that's dodge and parry to the same degree. Now I know my parry's stupidly higher than my dodge right now. That's just a bit of a fuck up on my part, but yeah, that's the one right now that I prefer the most. I take the least damage with this build, and I still do effective DPS with this spec. So above all, and this goes for every tank spec now, you want your hit and expertise capped. You want your hit to a soft cap, and you want your expertise hard capped, so none of your attacks will miss. See, look, against Skull, against boss level enemies, 0 dodge chance, 0 parry chance. That means you're not going to miss a shield slam, and you're going to keep that rage getting generated there to get those shield barriers up, which will really help you out in taking less damage. So that's stats wise. Of course, after you cap blows, dodge and parry, and then a bit of mastery just for that blocking going on. So that's about the stats still. Now to go on to the talents. The first tier, in my opinion, there's only really one choice, which is double time. You can use charge twice in a row. Each use has a 20-second recharge time. It can only grant rage every 12 seconds, which shows with this one you can charge every 12 seconds instead of 20, which means the cooldown is just reduced. But for this, if you need to, you can get that second charge off before. So like if there's a target here and I quickly need to go over here, I can do that with double time. But with Juggernaut I can't. But with double time I still have the option of generating that rage through that 12-second cooldown. Warbringer, basically a PvP talent, pretty much useless in PvE. The level 30 talents, in my opinion, the only viable one is in rage regeneration again. It's a quick on-demand heal. It heals for quite a lot if you're in rage, 40% in total. It has a relatively small cooldown, 1 minute, and it has no cost as well. So if you're struggling, if your heals are struggling, you can just boom, bash out that big heal. Second wind, you're not going to be under 35% health for a long period of time in a fight, and if you are, there's probably something going wrong in your raid. So that's why I don't really like second wind. Second wind is nice for DPS, I suppose, although it's argued for impending victory, but this is a tanking video, not a DPS video. So that's not really good for tanks, I would say. Impending victory, it takes a global cooldown, costs rage, heals 20%, 30-second cooldown. I don't like it at all. You want to keep as much rage as possible for your shield barriers, which is going to be your main source of damage reduction. Excuse me. And 20% isn't a lot. It's 30-second cooldown, not that great. 45, tier 45 now. They're pretty much all useless as of the latest patch, as of recording this video. Staggering Shout, useless. Piercing Howl, useless when you're going to need to slow mobs. The mobs that aren't immune to slows. Snares, you're not going to need snares. Disrupting Shout is quite nice. It was much nicer before where it was on a separate cooldown to Pummel, where you could just bash out a Pummel and then a Disrupting Shout, but of course now they share a 15-second cooldown. So the only time you're going to want to use Disrupting Shout is like the Galakrast encounter. If there's like 2 Shaman up and they're healing at the same time, you can interrupt them both. Or it's ranged as well, 10 yards. I mean, if you're not in, because Pummel's melee range, so if you're not quite in range, you can try one of those, see if you still interrupt. So that's the one I really like to roll with. Level 60 talents, Blade Storm. It's high damage, but for those 6 seconds you're not doing anything, and it sounds weird anyway. A tank blade storming, but basically it's not very effective for the tank. Maybe if you're not tanking the mob at that time, and there's lots of ads up. Excuse me. If there's lots of ads up, that might benefit you, and I don't know. I've never really used Blade Storm. Shockwave. Shockwave is Shockwave is a very classic tank ability, but unfortunately it's fallen by the wayside, and because of the balance that it's made for PvP, you have to use it on 3 or more enemies to lower the cooldown to 20 seconds. Otherwise it's a 40-second cooldown, and the damage just isn't a lot there. It really isn't, compared to Dragon Roar, the one I like to roll with. Dragon Roar is a nice, quick, high burst. It just boom, gets the damage out. It takes 1 global cooldown a minute, and if there's loads of mobs around for like trash, it has a small stun that stops spell casting or whatever. In all, that is the highest damage option, and probably the best one to use. Level 75 talents, Mass Spell Reflection is so situational it hurts, because there's so few abilities now that can actually be reflected, and plus it was not really worth. It's not going to be a massive AoE spell that hits every member that can be reflected. I can't think of one encounter that would be appropriate for. But I don't know, if you feel that you could use it, then go right ahead. Safeguard. Safeguard is a lot. It's a lot of attention. It requires a lot of attention to use effectively, because you have to look at your raid frames, especially if you're in a 25-man with 24 other people. You have to look who needs it the most, where they are. Is that going to mess up the boss positioning? Because obviously, if you safeguard, it's like an intervene, and you just charge over to them. Like on Iron Juggernaut, you don't want to safeguard someone and have him do his frontal cone AoE on the whole raid and just wipe you. So that's a really hard one to keep track of, and I don't really like that. I much prefer Vigilance, because it's just who's taking the most damage right now for whatever reason. Put it on them, 40-yard range, 30% damage reduction for 12 seconds. There's absolutely no problem with that. That's a fantastic little spell. Very good for if the other tank isn't very geared, isn't very good, or is doing some crazy stuff, like going with excessive amounts of stacks on something. Yeah, Vigilance I much prefer than anything else. Now, the last tier here is very situational if you're going to pick Avatar, Bloodbath, or Stormbolt. As in, you're going to have Avatar or Bloodbath throughout the whole thing, but you might switch one of those out for Stormbolt, depending on the encounter. But I'll cover Avatar first. It's just a flat out damage increase at the pull, and if you're struggling with threat as well, and you're doing the first pull, then that's really going to benefit you, because you're just going to have that more threat pumping out, and it lines up really nicely with Recklessness and Skull Banner, so it's quite easy to keep track of. Now, Bloodbath is the simulated one that does the most damage, However, it's a 1 minute cooldown, so it's harder to keep track of in a way. Like, I'm just trying out Avatar at the moment. I haven't, like, decided fully to use it. I think it's very interchangeable with Bloodbath. But with Bloodbath, I find it sometimes when you just forget to pump out those Dragon Roars, and it goes a few seconds over, and then those few seconds add on to the other few seconds that you miss, and it ends up becoming so far away from Recklessness and Skull Banner that it just doesn't benefit as well. So if you're having trouble keeping it up, I would advise Avatar, otherwise Bloodbath all the way. Now, Stormbolt is a very nice thing to use, mostly on the Galacraft fight. Keep referencing that fight, must like it a lot. It stuns the mobs, obviously. If one of the mobs is off fracturing a NPC, you can throw that over there if no one else is unable to stun them, interrupt them, or whatever. And against stunnable mobs, it's really nice because the tower bosses, because I always take the towers, they're not stunnable, so it does a lot of damage against them, and it's just that burst damage, like 500% weapon damage to targets that are permanently immune to stuns. That is a lot of damage when that. If you have Recklessness and Skull Banner with that and that crits, that is really going to ruin their day. But then again, it's on a 30-second cooldown, which means if you want to get the full usage out of it, it requires a lot of global cooldowns over the course of a fight. So it's very situational. If you require it for interrupting or stunning adds, then go right ahead for Stormbolt. If not, Avatar or Bloodbath. That's the way I like to roll. So moving on to glyphs. Glyph of Unending Rage, I would say, is almost a necessity. Having that extra 20 rage may not sound like a great deal, but if you can build up that rage, say you're off tanking and then you have to switch and you have that 120 rage, you can get an S-bar straight off the bat and get some vengeance building up, and then go straight into another S-bar that's powered by vengeance, and then you'll still have a bit of rage left over, and that'll really smooth your damage intake starting from the pull. Glyph of Hold the Line, again, I say the tank damage is very important to a raid, and this increases the damage of revenge following a successful parry. Now, as this spec, you're going to be parrying a hell of a lot, and revenge does a hell of a lot of damage as well as generate a lot of rage, so revenge is a very fantastic spell, or ability, and this just makes it that much better. Now, third glyph, I'm rocking this right now. I'm just like trying around a bit. The glyph of Gag Order, Heroic Throw and Pummel silence the target for 3 seconds. I'm not too sure about this glyph. I don't think there's necessarily a built one that you absolutely need. You can always interchange with like Death from Above, get the extra heroic leap if there's high movement, Insight for that extra damage, Resonating Power if, you know, get more damage out of Thunderclap and use it less, Shield Slam if you need that Dispel. There's a lot of different options for Arms Warriors in the glyphs department. Arms Warriors? Wow. Protection Warriors? Wow. Massive fuck up there. Alright, so those are the glyphs and talents done. Now to get into your rotation, or as I prefer to call it, the priority system. Obviously, as a Protection Warrior, you're going to want to be generating as much rage as possible so you can get as many shield barriers up. Shield barriers are the meat and potatoes of this spec. If you're not shield barriering, you're doing it wrong, at least with this build. So you're going to want to charge in if you can. Get that Sunder Armor up to 3 stacks, just to benefit your raid. Get a Shield Slam off, get your Revenge on cooldown. Shout and Berserker Rage. Just generate as much rage as possible. That's what you really want. If there's any time where you can generate rage, do it. Like Shield Barrier comes off cooldown, Revenge off cooldown, Shield Barrier's back up now, and just use Devastate as a filler. Shield Slam off, Shield Slam again. Prioritize Shield Slam over Revenge, and when you get the proc to make your Heroic Strike and Cleave free, use it, because it's off the cooldown, off the global cooldown. It's a bit more damage, and it's nothing wrong with it. Now, little tips and tricks for pulling the boss is if you know damage is going to be relatively stable throughout the fight, pop a shield wall or a cooldown off on the pull, because on the pull is going to be when you're taking the most damage. So as you charge in, get like a shield slam off, Berserker Rage, Revenge, and then just pop your shield wall. Get that smooth damage in while your Vengeance builds up, because Vengeance is an incredibly integral part of playing a tank. If you're not keeping an eye on your Vengeance and how it's affecting you, then you really should be, because Vengeance basically dictates how powerful your shield barriers are. On some bosses, shield barrier will absorb upwards of like 150k, and on others it will absorb 300k. I mean, it's that different with Vengeance. So I hope this guide helped you out, guys. Have fun with your Prot Warriors, and good luck.